Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined this evening by two excellent guests. Firstly, sitting opposite me at a careful social distance is from the Save Loch Lomond campaign, Sam Payton. Sam, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, Kenny, but once again, it's a bit strange to be in the studio because I used to be at home. But yeah, it's good to be
Well,
here.
it is good to see you. And coming in remotely, we have Roger Mullen, Director of Momentous Change. Roger, how are you doing today?
I'm doing just grand and delighted to see both of you there in the studio.
Excellent. Well, we are going to be talking about independence tonight, ahead particularly of the All Under One Banner Assembly that's happening this weekend. And then, of course, the SNP conference, which is happening in a couple of weeks. We're going to be talking all about the state of play with the independence campaign. But first, we have some of today's headlines. So we start, as we always do, with our coronavirus statistics update. And as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 1,072,643 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres. Of these, 993,626 were confirmed negative, 79,017 were positive. There were 1,357 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Scotland today, and sadly, 56 new reported deaths. This will, of course, be an underestimate of the total number of cases, as not everyone with the virus will necessarily show symptoms, and not everyone will necessarily get themselves tested. We do urge you, as always, if you are showing symptoms, please do book a test as quickly as you can. It makes a difference for all of us. Of the people who have tested positive, there were 1,228 people in hospital last night, 96 of whom were in intensive care. And the number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 3,244. This number only includes those who have died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. And the latest UK daily figures available show that 51,304 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 376 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just those in hospitals. And we also have some updates on quarantine. Travellers arriving in Scotland this weekend from Greece, except for the islands of Crete, Corfu, Kos, Rhodes and Zante, as well as the sovereign base areas of Akrotiri and Dikelia in Cyprus, must quarantine on arrival for 14 days. A significant increase in cases of coronavirus in those areas, as well as a rise in the number of cases testing positive and the associated risk of importation into Scotland, has led to the decision to remove that exemption status. At the same time, Bahrain, Cambodia, Chile, Iceland, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Turks and Caicos, and Laos are being added to the list of destinations exempt from quarantine on arrival in Scotland. And all of these changes take effect from 4 a.m. on Saturday morning. That's tomorrow. The current additional restrictions in relation to Denmark are to remain in place for another 14 days, but will be reviewed should new information become available on progress by the Danish authorities. And before we go on to the rest of the news, if you would like to join the conversation, you can do so on Twitter by following us at Broadcast Scot and using the hashtag Scotland at 7. We will be flashing some of those up on the screen, as you can see there. And obviously, we welcome your comments on some of these other stories, as well as our discussion on independence. But our top headline today, Dominic Cummings, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff and one of the architects of the Vote Leave campaign, has left his role with immediate effect. Lee Kane, who was rumoured earlier this week to be taking over from Cummings when he was due to leave at the end of this year, has also been pushed out after Boris Johnson reportedly became angry at being briefed against by those key aides. Ian Blackford MP, the SNP's Westminster group leader, said Boris Johnson's most senior advisers are abandoning the Prime Minister like rats on a sinking ship. It tells you everything you need to know about this arrogant, incompetent and self-serving government. Kirsten Oswald MP said the Prime Minister had completely alienated Scotland by bringing the Vote Leave campaign to the heart of the UK government, and trashed his reputation even further by refusing to suspend Mr Cummings after he broke lockdown rules. Polls published in the aftermath of the Cummings scandal saw the Prime Minister's net approval ratings fall to -5, with people viewing the Tories as incompetent, out of touch, untrustworthy, and serving their own interests. Separately, a poll published by YouGov yesterday found 74% of Scots think Boris Johnson is doing badly as Prime Minister. That was the 14th poll in a row to show majority support for independence in Scotland. Reports of fraud and online child abuse continue to rise sharply, a new report by Police Scotland shows. Crimes of fraud have increased by 45.4% in the first 6 months of 2020-21 compared to the same period last year and are 83.4% above the 5-year average. Online child sexual abuse is up by 18.4% year on year and by 35.8% when compared to the 5-year average for the same period. Between April and September, there were 7,466 reported crimes of fraud compared to 5,136 during the same period last year, according to Police Scotland's Quarter 2 performance report. During the same period, there were 1,036 reports of online child sexual abuse compared to 875 during the first 2 quarters of the previous year. Wildlife crime reports have nearly doubled, according to more figures published by Police Scotland today. Between April and September 2020, Police Scotland reported 203 wildlife crime offences compared to 111 in the same period last year, an increase of 82.9%. Detection rates also increased though, rising to 55.2% in 2020 compared to 34.2% in the same 6-month period for last year. The latest figures were released again in Police Scotland's quarterly performance report covering April to September of this year. The SNP has notched up another impressive local by-election win after Ethan Young was elected as the new councillor for Craigentinny and Duddingston. In the SNP's third by-election success in a row, the party secured an impressive 39% of first preference votes, with the Tories trailing behind on 18.9% and Labour on 16.1%. Following his victory, Councillor Young said, "I am absolutely delighted to be elected as councillor for Craigentinny and Duddingston, and I'll work to deliver the very best for all people in the ward and across the city of Edinburgh. I'm hugely grateful to the team of local activists who worked tirelessly to get our message out and ensure the SNP came out on top in this by-election." Asylum seekers who have crossed the channel in small boats are being subjected to inhumane treatment, independent monitors have said, with individuals moved between detention centres with untreated broken bones, burns and even cancer. Evidence collated by 4 separate independent monitoring boards, which scrutinise prisons and immigration detention facilities, found that people arriving at Dover were being kept in crowded conditions with no social distancing and that serious errors were included in their documentation. The bodies examined the process those arriving on small boats go through from the moment they disembark in Dover from a dinghy, through attending different immigration detention centres, to being put on a plane back to the EU country they passed through before arriving in the UK. It's the first time the whole process that small boat asylum seekers go through in the UK has been independently assessed. Dame Anne Owers, the national chair of the Independent Monitoring Board, said in her evidence that monitors believe that the cumulative effect amounts to inhumane treatment of detainees, which should be urgently addressed. US President-elect Joe Biden cemented his election victory by capturing the battleground state of Arizona late last night, but the official transition to his administration remains stalled as President Donald Trump refuses to accept defeat. Biden was projected to win Arizona after more than a week of vote counting from the November 3rd election, Edison Research said. He became only the second Democratic presidential candidate in 7 decades to win the traditionally Republican state. Biden's win in Arizona gives him 290 electoral votes in the state-by-state electoral college that determines the White House winner, 20 more than the winning threshold of 270. Biden also holds a lead of more than 14,000 votes in the uncalled state of Georgia, a margin that is nearly certain to survive a manual recount. Although the national popular vote does not determine the outcome, he is winning that as well by more than 5.3 million votes, or 3.4 percentage points. More employers across Scotland can apply for funding to provide upskilling and reskilling opportunities for existing staff. The Flexible Workforce Development Fund helps businesses continue to invest in the workforce and is available for all of Scotland's employers who are subject to the UK Government's apprenticeship levy. For the first time, the fund will now be available for both levy payers and SMEs across the private, public and third sectors. In August, the Scottish Government announced immediate investment in jobs to provide the foundations for a strong recovery from coronavirus. As part of this, the fund, which is now in its fourth year, was doubled to £20 million for this financial year, with £13 million made available through the first phase to allow colleges to provide additional support for levy-paying employers. The second phase of the fund, backed by £7 million, will also be utilised to respond directly to the impacts of the pandemic and will open to applications on the 16th of November. And finally, Scotland's men will be represented at a major international football tournament for the first time since the 1998 World Cup, following a win on penalties against Serbia in Belgrade last night. Ryan Christie put Scotland ahead in the 52nd minute, but Luka Jovic snatched an equaliser in the last minute. Extra time was goalless, leading to a penalty shootout. Scotland scored all five before David Marshall punched clear the final Serbian shot from Fulham striker Alexander Mitrovic. Scotland will now enter Group D at the tournament next year. Due to the unusual plan of holding the tournament across 12 different European cities, Scotland will play their games against Croatia and the Czech Republic at Hampden, with the other game against England taking place at Wembley. And I'm sure that we all congratulate Scotland's men finally living up to the promise shown by the women over the last few years. And I'm sure that as we look at 2021, I'm sure the thought of Scotland on the rise will be quite appropriate. And speaking of that, we did say we were going to talk about independence today. And as we said, the All Under One Banner Assembly is happening this weekend. Now, I was asked to conduct a few interviews to be used as for clips to show during the day, and one of those was with Ian Blackford. And we asked Ian Blackford when an independence referendum might happen, given that we had asked Mike Russell the same question before, and he had said September. So of next year, I should say. So we asked Ian Blackford about that, and we're just going to show you that wee clip now. We've had Michael Russell say that September next year was a potential time for another referendum. So obviously that would be a much shorter campaign than the 2014 campaign. What difference does that make? And also, what difference does it make to be starting from a position where Yes is in the lead?
Again, I think that's really a crucial question because, as we all know, there was a significant lead into the last referendum in 2014. I don't think it's necessary on this occasion to have such a long time. I think we can move quickly. I think we can put the mechanisms in place, get the legislation in place, make sure that we can have a referendum any short number of months post the election in May of next year. And it may be possible that, as Mike has suggested to you, that we should be aiming for September. I think, therefore, what the movement has to do is anticipate that this is going to come. So the movement has to think about how we campaign, and of course that's very different in the situation of COVID. And we've got to make sure that we are having that discussion with the people in Scotland about that vision that we have for independence, the type of country that people want to live in. So I would simply say that time is of the essence.
So that was just a wee excerpt from the interview that we did with Ian Blackford. If you're going to or participating rather in the All Under One Banner Assembly tomorrow, then you will get to hear a wee bit more of that interview. It was quite an interesting one. It is worth catching up with if you are attending the event tomorrow. But I'll come to you first. Ian Blackford there agreeing with Mike Russell, who spoke to us on the show a few weeks ago, and both saying that the movement should be preparing as if an independence referendum is going to happen next September. Now, setting aside, the question of whether or not we're still in the middle of a pandemic at that point, do you think, just in terms of the logistics of organising a referendum, that September next year is a realistic date?
Yes, I think it's absolutely realistic. And I think it's more than realistic. I think that the wider independence movement would welcome clarity and give it something to focus on. And given that we're in the midst of a pandemic, I think some people might actually be surprised that people are talking about referendum occurring as early as September next year, given that we don't know what the outcome of the pandemic is going to be and the effect it's going to have on politics. But I certainly welcome what Ian was saying.
And Sam, what about you? How are you feeling about this? Does September next year feel realistic to you?
It does feel realistic. It gives us plenty of time to kind of organise the troops, so to speak, and for everybody to get on board and to start campaigning towards the referendum. And hopefully it'll start to kind of put some people's doubts to rest about whether there was going to be a referendum. But certainly, I can see, I'm looking forward to campaigning for the referendum. As everybody knows, we Save Loch Lomond campaign, we like to dress up, so we'll probably get a couple of costumes on, family friendly. But no, it's all about pulling everybody together. And I think as much as we've been in the pandemic, one of the things that the pandemic has shown is that Scotland is very capable of governing herself. So taking the positive out of the pandemic is that, so, and what restrictions we've had in place. So I think this will be certainly a different campaign to 2014.
Well, obviously, we have seen 14 polls now this year, all showing a majority for independence, some bigger than others, certainly, but it does seem to be a fairly constant thing now. We've always heard this phrase, the settled will of the people of Scotland. This has always been what was the driving force behind devolution and now towards independence. Do you think that those 14 polls in a row suggest that it is now the settled will of the people of Scotland?
Yeah, even if you don't kind of go by the polls and things, the polls are being, by the UK government polls and things like that. They're not just, SNP or Greens or anything like that. They're right across the board, and they are all showing the rise of independence. But even if you're out and about talking to people, you can see that there is a rise in independence, and people who would have voted no in 2014. People who traditionally do believe in the concept of the union are very much now starting to realise what we can do and what we can achieve as an independent country. And what's happened with the pandemic, it's been laid bare, the restrictions. There's been no hiding it. There's been no dressing it up, so to speak, that this is because of X, Y, and Z. It has been laid bare. The naked truth is out there, if you want to put it that way. The restrictions that are upon Scotland. So, I think the polls are kind of showing a very true light of the need for independence rising.
And Roger, what about you? There obviously has been a big change in public opinion this year. Do you think that is stable now? Do you think? We don't want to count our chickens, obviously, but do you think now that's a lead that's going to be very, very difficult for a no campaign to chip away at?
I think we've got to be realistic here. I think what it will do is it will show the no campaign that they've got to fight incredibly hard, and I'm pretty sure they'll throw every resource they can at it, including the UK government resource. So I don't think we should kid ourselves that this is going to be anything like an easy stroll in the path to independence. The other thing I would say is that we've got to be very careful about polls of the type that are undertaken. What's going to matter on the day is who actually turns up to vote. And what we don't have is quite as clear a handle on is how motivated people are, particularly those who say they've switched from no to yes. How motivated are they going to be to turn out? And we also don't know, let's imagine it is September, what the context and the way in which that vote will be undertaken. So I think we would be very foolish to go into the preparations for a campaign thinking it's going to be easier than it was in 2014. I think we've got to be prepared for as tough a fight as we can imagine is going to happen. I also think, you mentioned, Kenny, in your introduction that tomorrow there's going to be a big online conference all under one banner. I think 1,200 people have registered, of which I am one. I think it's very important that the wider movement gets involved from the outset, and that there is an integration, as far as that is possible, of campaigning. We know that we're going to be campaigning, at least in the initial months, between now and, say, next May, on a very different basis to what will happen subsequently. First of all, because we will await a new parliament before we can get legislation through for a referendum. So that context changes. But also, hopefully, with the coming of a vaccine and the like, that there may be prospects of having a more traditional form of campaigning. But even if we have more traditional forms of campaigning, I think the way in which people have been able to reach out and communicate during the pandemic through the use of technologies such as this, that's not going to go away. So we're going to have many new avenues for campaigning that were not present in 2014. So we've really got to make the most of every avenue for campaigning that is available to us.
Well, I mean, that is one of the interesting factors, isn't it? That this change that we've seen in the polls has happened mostly during the pandemic, when we haven't seen any campaigning out on the streets or anything like that. I wonder, when it comes to this thought of how a campaign might go for independence next year, where do you think the movement stands with building a new case for independence? We've talked a lot in the past about the white paper that was produced in 2014, Scotland's Future. We don't quite have something like that yet for any future referendum. We have things like the Sustainable Growth Commission. I wonder where you think we stand with that type of preparation.
Well, I think there's a lot of work to be done. I, of course, am not privy to what work might be being undertaken behind the scenes in the government in preparation of the equivalent of a white paper, but I think something like that is going to be essential. I think, too, you mentioned things like the Sustainable Growth Commission. Times have changed remarkably since then. When it was written, it was not knowing there was going to be a global pandemic and the effect that's had in our lives and the reputation of governments. It was also long before the prospect of having some understanding of what's going to happen by way of Brexit. And so there is a lot of change going on in society, a lot of change going on globally that we need to take account of in constructing a new case. I think what we've got to remember is that we need to set out a very clear vision across a large swathe of areas for Scotland. I don't think, even though I'm somebody who was a Treasury spokesperson in Parliament and is interested in economics, I think we would be wrong to limit ourselves to saying, here is simply the economic case for independence. I think we need to look more widely at what the democratic case is, what the ethical case is, the way in which this will impinge on different generations, for example. We have to look at climate change. We have to look at international relations to set Brexit in that context. So I think there is a large case to be made that goes far beyond simply the economic case. That will take quite a bit of work. And there is one additional thing that I personally would like to see undertaken. And that is, as well as creating the vision, if you like, that people will campaign on for independence, and as well as mobilizing our campaigning as far as possible. I think what would also give confidence to those on the side of independence, as well as to the wider public, if we're seen to be doing more to prepare for independence. That is, putting in place transition arrangements, showing how that will be undertaken. Why don't we have a transition team? If you look at, for example, what happens every time a president in the US is elected, there's a number of months when there's a transition team looking at the transition to power. I think we should do something broadly the equivalent of that, and we can start doing that very quickly. And I think that would give greater confidence. It would show to our supporters that this is deadly serious. This is about achieving independence. This is about transitioning towards independence.
Now, Sam, we've seen as well the SNP has got this Social Justice Commission. Shona Robson was commissioned to do that work starting in the spring of last year, and that was supposed to kind of complement the Sustainable Growth Commission, providing that kind of social case on top of the economic case from the Growth Commission. I wonder though, Wings Over Scotland once wrote an article called the Buckaroo Principle, I think it was, where the idea that if you keep loading policies onto the independence case, you make it more likely that eventually some people are going to say, no, I don't want that. How serious a concern do you think that is when we talk about this building a case to have the difference between a policy-based case and perhaps a more just principled case on the democratic argument?
Yeah, I mean the buckaroo. Yeah, that is very true, because I mean majority of people are more interested. I mean they kind of get lost with politics because politics starts. You know, a lot of people are, and I don't mean this to sound derogatory to anybody or whatever, but a lot of people are not really interested in politics as such. And a lot of people don't think they're interested in politics because they see politics as policies. All the spin they see on programmes and politicians standing there nitpicking and things like that. But politics is more than that. It's about how we live. It's our daily lives. But a lot of people don't put politics and daily lives together, you know. So I think one of the things that I would like to see, which I feel in the 2014 campaign was lacking, maybe not in all areas, but certainly where I was, is engaging more with people and actually talking to people in their language, as in how I mean, as Roger says, a transition period, definitely need that. I agree with that. But talking to people, how it's going to affect them and their lives, how it's going to affect their quality of lives, their families, and that includes the older generations and the younger generations. And we have to have these conversations. And yeah, it's going to be difficult because there's some people that are just kind of stuck in their ways and they don't like change. And that's fine. It's accepting that. But it's just telling people how it's, you know, what's going to change, how it's going to be preparing them for change. Because the majority of people are scared of change. You know, they're scared of how it's going to affect them and their livelihoods and so forth. And so we need to enter these conversations with people who are very scared, very nervous, very unsure, you know. Even people that turn around and say, no, definitely, we need to enter these conversations. We have to have these adult conversations, whether they feel uncomfortable or not. And we need to start uniting as a broader movement. You know, yes, there's going to be disagreements in how, once Scotland is up and running and independent, that can wait. At the moment, it's having this transition, start behaving like an independent country, which is pretty much what we've been doing through the pandemic to a certain degree. We've been behaving. Carry that on, have the transition, have the conversations with people in their own language. You know, campaigning may be different. So it may be that we require relying on more technology, more visual. So use that to our advantage, rather than, because sometimes with politicians, you feel as if you're being lectured, and that's how some people feel. Not everybody feels like that, but we've got to recognise it's how people perceive how others talk to them, and is taking that into consideration. And I think, and I'm going to be a bit thingy here, I'm mindful of how we're talking to people and what language we're using and what context of language we're using as well. And it's all about positivity. And if people have concerns, is addressing those concerns and being honest with them as well.
Now, Roger, on that kind of note, the independence movement, obviously, the bulk of it is centre-left. But there's everything from, hardcore socialists on the far left. There's the Greens, there's the SNP, which itself is a big tent, and then going all the way over to the other side of the spectrum, there's people like Michael Fry, who was a Tory councillor who then turned out to support independence in 2014. How do you think all those tensions in the movement can be managed, where people have different goals for independence?
I think that is a very important question. And I also think it reflects in part what Sam was saying about the way in which we need to engage with people. I mean, I come from a very different political place, a different ideological place from Michael Fry, who you mentioned. Mm-hmm. But I would like to think I consider myself a friend of Michael Fry. We can have lots of disagreements, but we agree in the need for Scottish independence. And that has to be very important in the way in which we move forward. So I want to move forward with people who take different positions from myself in lots of different policy areas. But we recognise that we need a proper forum in Scotland where we can meaningfully debate these issues and where we have the power to move forward once we settle these issues. And that's really what self-determination, what Scottish independence brings us. So I think we need to be a bit more respectful towards one another within the broader movement, as well as being a bit more respectful towards those who currently don't want to achieve independence, but who we are going to try and convince to come with us on this journey. So I think that's all very important. And if I'm allowed to just reflect on something else Sam said about the way in which we engage with people in different settings, I think this is very important because it's not just the government, it's not just state institutions that are going to need to transition towards independence. Community groups are going to have to think, or it would be good if they began to think about what will happen if we move towards independence in terms of the way in which our community groups function, in terms of who we need to engage with and the like. So I see transition as being more than simply the political establishment transitioning. I see it as the entire community beginning to think and engaging in a transition towards a new future.
Now, just to stay with you, Roger, for a second, this obviously, if we are looking at September of next year for an independence referendum, then that only gives us a few months between the election and the referendum vote. That would be a massively shorter campaign than we saw in 2014, where it was effectively a 2-year campaign period. What kind of difference do you think that will make, and in terms of the kind of campaign that can be run and the way that organisations, for example, will have to organise themselves before a referendum is actually announced?
Well, I mean, let me talk about this first of all in relation just to the SNP. There's going to be a conference in a couple of weeks' time at which there's going to be a new leadership, new NEC elected. And my view is from day one, they've got to be focused on this. They've got to put other issues that in the past year or two may have divided people. They have got to be put to one side. We have got to focus relentlessly on Scottish independence and the referendum. You're absolutely right to say we don't have anything like the time to build up towards the crescendo that we had in 2014. We're going to have to really hit the ground running, and at a time of the pandemic. So this is going to be a major challenge. It means we can't indulge ourselves in our own little interests. and that what we have got to do is relentlessly focus on this. Otherwise, we won't pull things together quickly enough, and we won't do it in as united a fashion as we need to do it if we're really going to win.
Now we've kind of this idea of unity across the movement has come up several times already this evening. Sam, I wonder, there are obviously divisions in the movement now, divisions about strategy, about leadership, about how things are going to happen, when things are going to happen. How easy do you think it is going to be over the next, say, 6 months, moving towards the election, to kind of mend some of those divisions? Do you think perhaps that once a date is set, a lot of those divisions will melt away, or do you think there is possibly more work to be done?
Yes, there needs to be more work done, but yes, I think once a date's set, it gives everybody a focus. Because at the moment, I think one of the biggest problems with the movement is there's no focus. So people are pretty much here, there, and everywhere. Nobody's focusing on, the end goal, so to speak. So I think once we have a date, then people can then start focusing all that attention, that energy onto that date. Yes, it's going to be a very short campaign between May and September, but in saying that, that doesn't stop people from starting the now. That's not stopped people from a week ago, 2 weeks ago, or a month ago. Because to be honest, to a certain degree, we've all been doing a certain level of campaigning, so to start at the now, start uniting just now, start having these conversation, and as Roger says, even within the local community groups, and how they might. So it's coming right down to working from the kind of grassroots, working up, not from the hierarchy working down. It's got to be from the grassroots working up, and start. And again, it all comes down to perception and how people perceive things. So if people start having these conversations now, start with the kind of soft campaigning at the moment, and at the end of the day, we've got the Scotland game to look after in 2021. What a better way to unite Scotland, if we, the end of the day, it's doable, but people need to start acting like adults, and they need to start putting their attention to where it's needed, and start focusing on the end result and having proper adult conversations with each other. Hopefully we can all act like adults, and it's doable.
And Roger, the SNP obviously is by far the largest political representative of the independence movement. And there have been criticisms from within the movement about the SNP not being close enough to the grassroots, not being in touch with the grassroots, sometimes not listening very well. Now, I know you're standing to be on the NEC, and you're talking about things like transparency and accountability. What do you think needs to change, and how easy do you think it will be for the SNP to win back the trust of some of those activists who are a wee bit miffed with the way the SNP has behaved recently?
Well, I think one of the things that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to engage with all the talents in the party, but also in the wider independence movement. I'm sure you find, with talking to lots of people in the movement, that we have got a huge reservoir of talent, which is often untapped and underutilized. And so the first thing that I would do is I would want to engage more effectively and release the talents that we've got in all sorts of spheres to help us build the case. I think secondly, if you look historically, it is very rare. It's not that it never happens, but it's very rare to really see independence being won only by an elite and only by a leadership of a cause. It is most likely to be won by a much larger movement of what we would call the grassroots. In other words, a release of the will of the people. And that's what we need to tap into. So that I think if we're going to win this, we have got to be much more focused on building from the grassroots up, from campaigning on the street level up. And in that regard, to some extent, people, for example, let us imagine that I ended up being elected to the NEC and the SNP. I would think what we would have to recognise, it is our duty to support the people who do the work on the ground. It's not the job of the people on the ground to support me as a member of the NEC. And so what we need to do is we need to get this the right way around. And the right way around is to have this led by the mass movement that is going to achieve independence.
Now, obviously, come the end of this year, Sam, we're looking at Brexit, or the actual culmination of Brexit. Technically, of course, we are out of the EU now. But everything changes on December the 31st, one way or another, whether there is a deal or not. I wonder, when you look at that and the potential for things like the Internal Market Bill to start undermining the Scottish Government, how worried are you that that kind of thing is going to become another obstacle? And how do you see us getting past that obstacle?
Crikey. Now you've got me worried. It is another obstacle, and I'm absolutely terrified it's going to undermine everything we've worked for up until now. But again, I'm hopeful, and hope is a wonderful thing. And it's about the will of the people. That's where I'm going to sound like, but it's the will of the people. That's where the power is, and it's about the people standing up and saying, no, we don't want this. And at the end of the day, we never voted for Brexit, and it's reminding people we didn't vote for Brexit. So again, it's can I stand up to that as well? And the thing is as Scots, we've had to live like this for so long, where what we vote for, what we would like our country to be, is constantly being undermined, and this is just adding more and more fuel to that fire. And the more these things are happening, especially in the last year since the Tories were re-elected last year, you're seeing more and more people being turning towards independence. And again, it's that the Yes movement is growing. There's more and more people who were never engaged with politics before, who are now becoming interested, and people who voted no now becoming yes. And I'm going to keep saying it, and I'm going to keep repeating it. It starts with the grassroots, and it starts with just me and you and Roger having a conversation. It starts with all under one banner tomorrow. And that's where it starts, with people talking and having discussions and debating, and we need to keep that going. And it's about, again, I'm going to say it again, adult conversations.
Well, adult conversations are something that it's sometimes quite difficult to have with the current UK government. Roger, I was wondering, what do you think? We've seen again in the last week or so, Alistair Jack, for example, saying that a generation to him is 25 or 40 years, and that he intends to hold the SNP to their promise of a once in a generation vote. How worried are you that even if the SNP win a huge majority in next year's election, that the UK government is still going to feel okay about just saying no under no circumstances? How big an obstacle do you think that could be?
I think some of them, like Alistair Jack, will try and be an obstacle, but I think there are things that we need to be doing to create such a momentum behind it that makes it well nigh impossible for them to be an effective obstacle. And what we've also got to remember is that we're moving into a period, as if we haven't been living in a period that's chaotic enough, we're moving into a new period of chaos in a few weeks' time, as we fall out of the transition period in relation to Brexit, and we begin to face what the consequences of chaos are. And even people in Scotland, even the minority in Scotland who voted for Brexit, I don't believe they voted for utter chaos. And that's what they're being given by the UK government, utter chaos. Now, I want to see creative change in society. I want to see creative change for Scotland. But what I don't want the future to be determined in a context of utter chaos. And that's what we are being bequeathed by the UK government. So I think some of the problems and challenges that they're putting up to us is also for us a real opportunity to contrast the way in which we have a clear vision for the future. We have a direction of travel that makes sense in the modern world, and they don't have that. But in terms of going back to the issue of Alistair Jack and others of his hue, it's not just the SNP who are going to be having to be active in putting pressure on the UK government. The whole independence movement has a part to play in that. The way in which we campaign, the way in which we make our voice heard more and more week after week, street by street, individual conversation by individual conversation. This is going to be vitally important in changing the context within which some of these political decisions are eventually going to be made. And so I think there's a big task in hand, but I'm not daunted by it. I look forward to it, and I'm sure most in the movement look forward to it as well.
Now, we've just seen the UK government opening this big new building in Edinburgh. We also know that obviously, even though Dominic Cummings is gone now, Boris Johnson, Michael Gove were in charge of the Vote Leave campaign. They brought Dominic Cummings in. And we know that kind of politics is something that they're very comfortable with. I want to put this to both of you, but maybe Sam first. How worried are you about the idea of kind of the UK government playing dirty in a campaign, and how big an impact will that have, do you think?
Basically, I think we'd be rather naive if we believed they weren't going to play dirty. I think that's inevitable. They will. That's how they work. As you said, that's the kind of politics they're comfortable with. And yeah, they are going to. And we need to be prepared for that. And, but what we do is we don't fight fire with fire. We do the opposite. Mm-hmm. We want to show what kind of Scotland that we want. They're very, I'm going to use the word backwards. It's all about tradition and the way we've always done things and that. What here in Scotland, we talk about progress, about what we want for the future. So they're going to play dirty, and they will get dirty, and it is going to happen. But I don't think we'd be doing ourselves favours by using the same tactics back. I think we need to do the opposite. And that's how, and we show what type of Scotland. Because the thing is, if we start playing fighting fire with fire, we become no better than them.
Yeah.
And we're wanting away from that. So I'm worried, but I'm not that worried, because that's not the type of politics we do here. It's not the type of people we are. It's not the type of Scotland we are. But yeah, it's going to definitely happen.
Yeah. And Roger, kind of a similar question to you. Do you have concerns that in that potentially very short campaign, it might be difficult to perhaps debunk propaganda that's getting hammered into people through broadly unionist media and obviously from the UK government's bully pulpit?
Oh, of course it's going to be a challenge. It would be foolish to imagine it's not. But what we've got to also remember is we've got assets and resources that they don't have. And one of the key assets and resources we've got are hundreds of thousands of people who are already strongly committed to independence in Scotland, who we can mobilise to have the conversations on the ground. They cannot replicate that. They cannot get the amount of body heat in the campaign that we can get into a campaign. So, of course, we don't have control of the media. Of course, we are going to have to react against yet another Project Fear. But I think it's the way in which we respond to that that is going to be important. And we need to play to where our key assets are. And our key assets are what the late John McAteer many years ago, one of the early organisers in the SNP, called body heat. And we need to get body heat into the campaign through these individual conversations at community level, as well as, of course, doing the normal communications and PR stuff that politicians do. So ours has to be a campaign built around where our assets are, not merely reacting to what the opposition want to say.
Now, as we said, tomorrow the All Under One banner assembly starts. This is a big grassroots gathering. Lots of organisations represented. Broadcasting Scotland will have a stall virtually, so come and say hello to us. But Sam, I'm wondering, what are you hoping will come out of this assembly? What are you hoping will be different on Monday for the independence movement than it is today?
Hope, a way forward, and basically invigorate people to start having the conversations, to start from the ground level. That's what I'm hoping to get from it. I'm hoping other people do as well. And yeah, I think, I don't know what else to say. I think, yeah, hope, basically invigorating, bringing people together and start of having these conversations about moving forward to independence. And with people start hearing that, you know, this possible referendum in September 2021, that will give hope, that will give a goal, and it will invigorate people to start focusing on that. And also as well, just encouraging people to be able to have these conversations comfortably. Because a lot of people are scared to have these conversations, and they are scared to bring up, you know, independence and things, you know, when they're talking with family members and things like that. So maybe, you know, supporting each other to be able to do so, and encouraging each other not to be aggressive in the tone and the language we use, but gently kind of have these conversations. And obviously if somebody doesn't feel comfortable, you leave it, because you can't enforce people to have these conversations. But yeah, I hope by tomorrow, by the end of tomorrow, coming into Monday, everybody's reinvigorated and full of hope and full of passion. There's a word, passion. Yes, to go forward.
And Roger, obviously you said you're going to be at the assembly. You're also obviously going to be at the SNP conference in a couple of weeks. So by the end of November, where are you hoping the independence movement will be standing once these two big events are done with?
Right. Well, even if I start tomorrow, I think what we could all do, every individual who's joining in tomorrow, could treat tomorrow as our own personal starting gun to our own campaign for independence. This is when we should really start. And I think by the time we get to the SNP conference at the end of November, once new office bearers are in post, if I go back to what I said earlier, I think they need to have an immediate and then a relentless focus on the independence referendum, get campaigning up and running organisationally as quickly as possible to match the individual campaigning. So I think not needing to be done. I would like to think that the majority of our grassroots would feel before the end of the year that they can see real signs that we're back into full swing campaigning mode for Scottish independence. I think that is absolutely doable. Everybody needs to do their bit. Let's all start tomorrow.
Well, that, as I say, there is almost certainly going to be a huge amount of discussion about all of these issues tomorrow. So I'm just going to finish now with one more question. Sam, how confident are you that within the next, let's say, 5 years, the term of the Parliament, that Scotland will be independent?
Oh, very confident. This is the closest, I think, we've been in a long, long time, for as long as I can remember. This feels more doable than 2014. And I know if we get this wrong, my 8-year-old's not going to be happy. And I don't want to be listening to him moaning, saying that we got it wrong. Trust me, people, please. There is nothing worse than your child telling you,
You voted the wrong way. Or
you didn't do
enough.
it. You didn't do enough.
Yep.
This is about them. This is about their future as well as our future, but their future more than anything. And our kids are very more politically aware than what we were at that age. And they are really counting on us. And I can say that from the bottom of my heart. My 8-year-old is very much counting on us getting this right. That's honestly, if you had to live with my 8-year-old, you would know, yes. He goes on about it a lot. But no, please, so we need to get this right. So, yeah, I'm being very confident. I'm going to say 99.9% we're going to get it. And I've got to say that in case my 8-year-old's listening in and watching.
To be fair to your 8-year-old, I'm very impressed with his political activism. But Roger, the same question to you. How confident are you that an independence referendum can be held and won inside the term of the next Scottish Parliament?
I am very confident that if we get our act together and we all focus on the ultimate prize, that this is doable. And it's all our responsibility as individuals to make sure that this happens. I would also say that if after the next parliamentary term after May runs its full time, we will have failed. Because what we want to do is this devolved parliament to come to an end as quickly as possible by winning independence and electing our first independence parliament in Scotland.
Well, that does seem like a very optimistic place to end. As we said, the All Under One Banner Assembly is happening tomorrow. Sorry, bear with me 1 second. Oh, we have just heard that the state of Georgia has just been called by the NBC news network in the States for Joe Biden. We did mention earlier he had a lead of about 14,000 seats. There is going to be a full manual recount of Georgia, but obviously with a lead of 14,000, it is highly unlikely that Donald Trump can reverse that kind of thing without some sort of miracle. So that's probably good news for a lot of our friends in the United States. But that is all we have time for today. As I said, we could probably talk about all of these issues for a lot longer. But All Under One Banner has arranged a whole conference for you to do that over the weekend. If you haven't yet registered, you can find the link on the All Under One Banner website and I think on their Twitter page as well. So if you want to get involved, you can still do that. But as I say, that is all we have time for. So thank you very much to Sam Payton for joining me in the studio and Roger Mullen for joining us remotely. And thank you at home for joining us as well. There would be no point in making these shows without an audience. So thank you very much for being part of it. We do have to ask, if you're able to support us financially, then please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register and sign up there as a supporter. Your £5 a month is what helps Broadcasting Scotland just stay on the air. And if we are looking at, obviously, the election next year and potentially an independence referendum as well, we are going to need some resources to help us cover those big events, to get around the country, to potentially pay staff as well. I don't know if I'm meant to say this, but we are planning on launching a crowdfunder very, very soon. I won't say too much about it, but we do have some big plans, and we hope very much that you will support those if you can. If you can't support us financially, we absolutely understand though, and you can still make a big, big difference for the channel by being our marketing team. If you follow us, first of all, on Twitter at Broadcast Scot, like our Facebook page, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and then share the shows around with people. Word of mouth is by far the best way for us to spread the word about what Broadcasting Scotland is and what we do here. So do please let your friends and family and anyone else you talk to know that Broadcasting Scotland is here and worth a look. And finally, again, with this big political year ahead, we are going to need more people to help us cover all of that as well. So if you're interested in getting involved, wherever you are in Scotland, I have to stress this, if you want to come into the studio and present a show, then you need to be close to Glasgow. But if you want to be a host of other aspects of what we do, covering other counts, for example, during an election, then it doesn't matter where you are. We need people everywhere. So do please get in touch with us if you get any interest in getting involved in building a better broadcaster for Scotland. But that is absolutely all we have time for. We will be back on Sunday with the full Scottish. I think Maggie is going to be back on Sunday. I'm not 100% sure, but if not, then it'll probably be me. So one of us will see you. Oh, I'm being told it is me. Okay, well, I'll see you on Sunday for the full Scottish. But until then, thank you once again to Sam Payton and to Roger Mullen. Thank you for joining us and have a great weekend. Goodbye. Hooray! That was good.